Have you ever looked at a stranger in a crowd and wondered if they were truly who they appeared to be, or if they were hiding a dark secret beneath a mundane facade? In the modern world, anonymity is becoming a luxury of the past, as cameras and algorithms map the geometry of our faces with terrifying precision. For decades, fugitives could vanish into the vastness of the United States by simply changing their names and moving to a new town where nobody knew their history. But technology has fundamentally altered this game of cat and mouse. Today, we are diving deep into the chilling and fascinating story of a man who thought he had successfully erased his past, only to be unmasked by the unblinking eye of facial recognition technology 40 years later. The story begins on a dreary and rain-soaked morning in November of 1978, in the bustling industrial city of Cleveland, Ohio, where the fog rolled off Lake Erie to blanket the streets in gray. The target was the First National City Bank, which stood as a fortress of wealth and security in the heart of the downtown district. A delivery of cash was scheduled to arrive at exactly 9 o'clock in the morning via an armored transport vehicle, guarded by 2 armed officers. The air was thick with the smell of exhaust fumes and wet pavement, as the city woke up to another workday unaware that a meticulously planned crime was about to unfold. This was an era before digital surveillance and high-definition cameras watched every corner. Waiting in a parked sedan across the street was a man named Thomas Blackwood, who was a career criminal known to local law enforcement for a string of burglaries, but nothing violent. Thomas Blackwood was desperate for a way out of his mounting gambling debts and saw this heist as his golden ticket to a new life in a tropical paradise. He sat gripping the steering wheel with leather-gloved hands, while his heart hammered against his ribs in anticipation of the approaching armored truck. He was not alone in this endeavor, as he had recruited 2 accomplices who were equally desperate and willing to risk their freedom for a share of the promised loot. The plan was simple in theory, but relied heavily on precise timing and the element of surprise. As the armored truck pulled up to the curb and the guards stepped out with the canvas bags of currency, the tranquil morning shattered into chaos as Blackwood and his crew sprang into action. They wore grotesque rubber masks that distorted their features into permanent caricatures of smiling clowns, which added a surreal horror to the violence that followed. Shouting commands and waving shotguns, they forced the guards to the ground while bystanders froze in sheer terror on the sidewalks. The robbery itself took less than 3 minutes to execute, but the psychological impact on the witnesses would last a lifetime. They tossed the heavy bags into the trunk of the sedan and screeched away, leaving behind only the smell of burnt rubber and fear. The Cleveland Police Department responded within minutes, but the getaway vehicle had already vanished into the labyrinth of city streets and highway on-ramps. Detectives arrived to find a chaotic scene filled with traumatized witnesses who could offer little description beyond the terrifying clown masks and the dark sedan. The initial investigation was led by Detective Sergeant Miller, who was a seasoned veteran of the force, with a reputation for being tenacious and unyielding. Miller knew immediately that this was not a spur-of-the-moment crime, but a calculated operation carried out by men who had studied the bank's schedule. The city was placed on high alert as roadblocks were established on major arteries leading out of town. Despite the swift response, the trail went cold almost immediately, as the getaway car was found abandoned in a derelict warehouse district, just 5 miles from the crime scene. The vehicle had been wiped clean of fingerprints, and the interior doused in bleach to destroy any forensic evidence that might identify the perpetrators. Inside the trunk, police found only a single discarded clown mask, which seemed to mock them with its frozen plastic grin. It was a taunt from the criminals, who had seemingly evaporated into thin air with over $500,000 in cash. For Detective Miller, this discovery was a bitter pill to swallow, as it signaled that the thieves were professionals who knew exactly how to cover their tracks. Months turned into years, and the file on the first National City Bank heist began to gather dust in the archives of the Cleveland Police Department. While two of the accomplices were eventually caught and convicted, after spending their share of the money too lavishly, Thomas Blackwood remained a ghost. He had taken the bulk of the money and simply ceased to exist in the eyes of the law. Rumors swirled that he had fled to Mexico or perhaps Canada, but no credible sightings were ever reported. To the world, Thomas Blackwood was dead or gone forever, but in reality, he was carefully constructing a new identity in a quiet town in Oregon. In the small coastal town of Astoria, Oregon, a polite and unassuming man named Arthur Penhaligon opened a small bakery that specialized in sourdough bread and pastries. Arthur was known by the locals as a quiet soul who kept to himself, but was always willing to donate leftover bread to the local shelter. He paid his taxes on time, drove a modest station wagon, and attended church every Sunday without fail. Nobody in Astoria suspected that the gentle baker with the flour-dusted apron was actually Thomas Blackwood, the mastermind behind one of the most notorious bank heists in Ohio history. He had successfully buried his past under layers of lies and a completely fabricated history. Arthur Penhaligon lived this double life for nearly 4 decades, watching from afar as the world changed from the analog age of the 70s to the digital revolution of the 21st century. He avoided social media and never allowed his photograph to be taken at community events, citing a shyness and a dislike of vanity. He believed that as long as he stayed off the digital grid, he was safe from the ghosts of Cleveland. However, he underestimated the relentless march of technology and how the bureaucratic systems of the United States were slowly becoming interconnected. The state of Oregon, like many others, was beginning to modernize its Department of Motor Vehicles with facial recognition software. The turning point came in late 2016, when the state of Oregon began a massive project to digitize all driver license photos to prevent identity theft and fraud. The system was designed to scan the database and flag any duplicate faces that appeared under different names or social security numbers. It was a routine administrative update intended to catch people trying to obtain multiple licenses, but it inadvertently became a dragnet for cold cases. When Arthur Penhaligon went in to renew his driver license that year, he stood before the camera and smiled just as he had done countless times before, unaware that this specific image would be his undoing. The image of Arthur Penhaligon was processed by the algorithm, which mapped the distance between his eyes, the shape of his nose, and the contour of his jawline. This digital fingerprint was then cross-referenced not just with the Oregon database, but with a national repository of images maintained by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The system churned through millions of faces in a matter of seconds, searching for a match with a mathematical probability high enough to warrant human review. Deep in the archives of the Federal Bureau of Investigation lay a mugshot of Thomas Blackwood from a minor arrest in 1975. A red flag appeared on a computer screen in a secure server room, alerting analysts to a potential match between the respected baker from Astoria and the wanted fugitive from Cleveland. The software indicated a 98% probability that Arthur Penhaligon and Thomas Blackwood were the same person despite the 40 years of aging. The algorithm had seen through the wrinkles, the gray hair, and the weight gain to identify the immutable bone structure underneath. It was a breakthrough that no human detective could have made simply by looking at 2 photographs, separated by decades. The digital eyes had succeeded where traditional police work had hit a dead end. The notification was sent to the United States Marshals Service, who were responsible for hunting down federal fugitives, regardless of how much time had passed. Deputy Marshal Sarah Jenkins received the file and was initially skeptical that a cold case from the 70s had been solved by a computer glitch. She pulled up the old case files and studied the grainy black and white mugshot of Blackwood alongside the high-resolution digital photo of Penhaligon. The resemblance was uncanny once she looked past the superficial signs of aging. Jenkins knew she had to proceed with caution to ensure they had the right man before disrupting a quiet community. Deputy Marshal Jenkins contacted the Cleveland Police Department to request the original fingerprint cards for Thomas Blackwood, which had been preserved in microfiche archives. She also began a covert surveillance operation in Astoria to observe the daily routine of Arthur Penhaligon. Agents watched as the elderly man opened his bakery at 4 in the morning and greeted customers with a warm smile and a fresh loaf of bread. It was hard for them to reconcile this grandfatherly figure with the armed robber who had terrorized bank guards 40 years prior. Yet the facial recognition data was irrefutable, and they needed to close the net. The surveillance team gathered detailed intelligence on his habits, noting that he lived alone in a small cottage overlooking the river and had no known family in the area. They needed to obtain a DNA sample or a fresh set of fingerprints to confirm the match without alerting him to their presence. One afternoon, an undercover agent posed as a customer and ordered a coffee and a pastry from the bakery. After finishing the meal, the agent carefully bagged the paper coffee cup and the fork used by Penhaligon to clear the table. This discarded trash contained the genetic material that would seal the fate of the fugitive. The items were rushed to a forensic laboratory where technicians extracted DNA from the saliva on the rim of the cup. The genetic profile was compared to the DNA of Thomas Blackwood, which had been obtained from a lick on an envelope sent to his sister in 1978. The results came back a few days later as a perfect match, confirming that the gentle baker was indeed the long-lost fugitive. The United States Marshals Service began planning the arrest operation with a focus on safety, given the violent history of the suspect, even though he appeared frail. On a crisp Tuesday morning in May, the residents of Astoria were startled by the sight of unmarked federal vehicles surrounding the small bakery on Main Street. Deputy Marshal Jenkins and her team approached the front entrance wearing tactical vests and carrying badges, rather than heavy weaponry. They wanted to handle the situation with dignity, but were prepared for any outcome. The bell above the door jingled as they entered the shop, where the smell of yeast and sugar filled the air. Arthur Penhaligon looked up from the counter, his eyes widening slightly as he saw the grim faces of the officers. Deputy Marshal Jenkins walked up to the counter and placed the old mugshot of Thomas Blackwood next to the fresh driver license photo of Arthur Penhaligon. She asked him quietly if he knew the man in the black and white photograph. The elderly baker stared at the image for a long moment, and his shoulders seemed to sag as if a heavy weight had finally been lifted from them. He did not run or fight or deny the accusation. Instead, he simply nodded and whispered that he had been waiting for this day for a very long time. The mask he had worn for 40 years had finally crumbled. The arrest was peaceful and dignified, as the officers allowed him to remove his apron and turn off the ovens before placing him in handcuffs. As he was led out of the bakery into the bright sunlight, a small crowd of confused locals gathered to watch their neighbor being taken away. The news spread quickly through the town, causing shock and disbelief among the people who had known him as a pillar of the community. Nobody could believe that the man who donated to the food bank was a bank robber on the run from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. During the interrogation, Thomas Blackwood was cooperative and detailed in his confession, describing the fear and paranoia that had consumed his life. He explained how he had lived in constant terror of every police siren and every knock on the door. He told the investigators that the money from the heist had run out years ago, and that he had worked hard to build the bakery as a form of penance. He spoke of the loneliness of living a lie and the inability to form close relationships for fear of slipping up and revealing his true identity. His story was a tragic testament to the psychological toll of living as a fugitive. The legal proceedings that followed were a media sensation, drawing national attention to the power of facial recognition technology in solving cold cases. Prosecutors argued that despite his good behavior in recent decades, justice had to be served for the violent crime committed in 1978. The defense attorney pleaded for leniency, citing his advanced age and his positive contributions to the Astoria community over the last 40 years. It was a complex moral dilemma that weighed the letter of the law against the concept of redemption and the passage of time. The judge in the case acknowledged the unique circumstances, but ultimately sentenced Thomas Blackwood to 10 years in a federal correctional facility. The sentence was a compromise that recognized the severity of the original crime, while taking into account his age and health. For the victims of the robbery and the law enforcement officers who had chased him for decades, it was a moment of closure. The case of the first National City Bank heist was finally marked as closed in the police database. However, the legacy of the case extended far beyond the courtroom. This case became a landmark example of how biometric technology is reshaping the landscape of law enforcement and privacy. It demonstrated that there is no statute of limitations on the digital footprint we leave behind, and that our faces are permanent identifiers. Civil liberties groups raised concerns about the reach of facial recognition surveillance, arguing that it infringes on the right to privacy. They questioned whether it was ethical to scan millions of driver license photos without explicit consent from the citizens. The debate continues to rage as technology advances. For the residents of Astoria, the revelation left a scar on the community trust as they grappled with the realization that they never truly knew their neighbor. The bakery was eventually sold to a new owner, but the legend of the fugitive baker persisted in local lore. People would stop and stare at the storefront, wondering how many other secrets were hidden in plain sight in their quiet town. The story served as a reminder that everyone has a past, and sometimes that past is stranger than fiction. As Thomas Blackwood served his time in prison, he received letters from some of the people in Astoria who had forgiven him for his deception. They remembered his kindness and his bread rather than his criminal history, showing the complexity of human relationships. He spent his final years writing a memoir about his life on the run, hoping to deter others from choosing a path of crime. He passed away peacefully in the prison infirmary 5 years into his sentence, finally free from the burden of his double life. The technology that caught Thomas Blackwood has only become more sophisticated in the years since his arrest. Today, high-definition cameras and artificial intelligence can identify individuals in real time as they walk down the street or enter a stadium. The era of the unknown fugitive is rapidly coming to an end as the world becomes a digital panopticon. While this ensures that criminals face justice, it also raises profound questions about the nature of freedom and anonymity in the modern age. We must ask ourselves if we are comfortable with a world where our faces are constantly scanned and cataloged by invisible algorithms. The case of the long-lost fugitive serves as both a triumph of justice and a warning about the power of surveillance state. It forces us to confront the reality that we can never truly hide from our own identity, no matter how far we run or how much time passes. The digital eyes are always watching, and they never forget a face. The evolution of forensic science, from simple fingerprinting to complex DNA analysis, and now facial recognition, marks a new chapter in criminal history. Cold cases that were once considered unsolvable are now being reopened and resolved with startling frequency. Detectives are no longer limited by the physical evidence left at a crime scene, but can scour the digital realm for clues. This shift has given hope to families of victims who have waited decades for answers and closure. As we reflect on the story of Thomas Blackwood, we are reminded of the enduring power of truth and the inevitability of consequences. His life was a testament to the fact that you can change your name and your location, but you cannot change who you are. The past has a way of catching up to us, often in the most unexpected ways and through the most advanced means. It is a sobering thought for anyone who thinks they can outrun their history. In the end, the capture of the fugitive baker stands as a pivotal moment in the intersection of technology and law enforcement. It is a story that will be studied by future generations as the beginning of the end for the anonymous criminal. As we move forward into an increasingly connected and monitored world, we must remain vigilant about how these powerful tools are used. The line between safety and surveillance is thin, and we walk it every day. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the shadows of the past and the light of modern technology on the Midnight Docket. If you found this story compelling, please remember to like and subscribe for more deep dives into true crime and historical mysteries. We will continue to uncover the secrets that history has tried to hide and bring them into the light. Until next time, keep your eyes open and remember that nothing stays buried forever.